What if there was a naturally occurring molecule that could keep your cells young and disease-free? And what if it was present in all plants and animals? And no, I'm not talking about NAD plus and Nadovim. Our guest today is helping to further our access to such a molecule as the Director of Applied Science and Brand Development at Longevity Labs. This is the story of Spermidine Life with Don Moxley. Don, great to see you.
It's great to see you too. I'm excited to be here with you and meet your new tribe. New tribe.
Your new tribe. It's all new tribes. I mean, I met you at the Biohacking Congress last year in Miami, and I had known of Spermidine. I had heard people like Dave and others talk about you were on there. But a lot of people haven't heard about this, and it's a very interesting molecule. Can you give us a little bit about the history and maybe what brought you into working with this product?
Sure. So, yeah, I had not heard about it. It was funny. My background, I'm an exercise physiologist and sports scientist by training. I've taught university for 35 years, but I'd kind of left academics and was working in another industry. And I get a call one day from a buddy and says, "Hey, what do you know about autophagy?" And I said, I have a passing understanding. I haven't done a deep dive into that yet. And he said, "Have you ever heard of something called spermidine?" I'm like, "Nope, that's a new one to me." So he sent me the links. He said, "Do some work on this and see what you can figure out." And literally it started with a TED Talk, an Austrian TED Talk that Dr. Frank Medeo did. And I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. And so when you understand autophagy, and I think you understand this and most of your listeners do, that, listen, living longer is about fighting inflammation. Inflammation is when everyone talks about living to 120 or 180 or whatever. Well, you can't get to 120 unless you can get through 70 to 90. I mean, that's the challenge. And right now, the thing that's going to keep you to getting from 70 to 90 is an inflammatory related disease. Whether it's a drop in your immune system or cancer or cardiovascular disease, it's all inflammation related. Well, when you start to look at autophagy, listen, those two are inverse to each other. As inflammation goes up, autophagy goes down. As you raise autophagy, inflammation comes down. So that's one of the basic things we pick up along the way. Autophagy is critical for longevity. Well, and when you look at that, it's critical for a lot of healthy aspects that we're fighting in this modern lifestyle that we live in. So Dr. Frank Medeo, he is a researcher at the University of Graz in Austria, started looking at this novel molecule called spermidine. Spermidine was discovered 400 years ago. The guy that discovered the single lens microscope, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, probably a bit of a freak, because somewhere shortly after he figures out how to count threads he's got semen on a glass and he's looking at what's in his semen.
Such a guy thing to do.
I'm telling you, and I wonder what would happen if we had given that first microscope to a woman. Right. How much further ahead would we be? But he described these crystalline structures in semen. That's all that happens for almost 200 years. Then some Dutch researchers dig back into this molecule, and that's when they gave it the name spermidine. It has nothing to do with sperm. It's found in semen, mother's milk, babies, and all cells actually. In the 80s, we were looking at spermidine as it related to cancers. There's correlational stuff there, not causal stuff there. But in 2016, I think you know this, but they gave a Nobel Prize to the Japanese researcher that described autophagy and the processes of autophagy. Well, this was a great breakthrough. And then Dr. Medeo started looking at autophagy benefits as it relates to senescent cells, and then started using spermidine and put it on senescent cells and saw the revitalization of cells. So we see autophagy, senescence it can be caused by a lack of autophagy. As we increase autophagy, we cellular behavior return to normal. And this was the important part. So Dr. Medeo did this work in the 2019s, 2020s, 2018s, 19s, and 20s. And then they figured out how to extract spermidine from spermidine-rich wheat germ in Austria. So that's where Spermidine Life came from. We are a spermidine rich, it's called Salvio extract. Spermidine is actually what's called a polyamine. Your audience has heard of an amino acid. An amino acid, if you take the acid off an amino acid, you wind up with a polyamine. There's nitrogens and carbons and so forth. It's a fairly stable molecule. There are other in the class. So our Spermidine Life product not only has spermidine, but it has the precursor to spermidine, putrescine, and the postcursor, spermine. So it's got that full bandwidth of natural polyamines, and that's where we came from. They started in the market about 3 years ago, and myself and two other guys have been ramping this company up in this country.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because a lot of people forget that you can't have health without proper cell rejuvenation, restoration, all of that. Our cells are the building blocks, and so many of us forget about this and don't really focus on cell health. It's something that we really focused on. As I mentioned, we loved, NAD for that factor that, of course, it boosts the mitochondria and all of that. And that's why Spermidine was very interesting to us as well, because it is about cell health. Can you walk the audience through the process by which Spermidine does lead to cellular autophagy?
Yeah, so actually, we've got some new developments here that have just come along recently that we used to refer to Spermidine as a calorie restriction mimetic, meaning that typically through fasting, through a lack of energy coming into the body, we see a drop in insulin, we see a drop in IGF, and the cell looks for insulin and IGF to say, hey, there's nutrients out here, let's go do what cells do. But as those drop, the cell looks and says, there's no energy coming in. While we're in this state, let's go ahead and clean ourselves up. And that is autophagy, because when cells are making proteins, they're not always made correctly. They may be folded incorrectly, or there might be some change in the development. But that protein that the cell made incorrectly doesn't go anywhere, and it just sits around in the cell. If that builds up, that looks like that's where dementia is coming from. When we look at tau proteins and these kinds of things with dementia, it looks like it's that buildup of proteins. Autophagy is the process for cleaning that out. So we typically trigger this using calorie restriction. Now, what we've learned along the way, there are things that mimic calorie restriction. That's why we call it mimetics. Resveratrol. This is what Dr. Sinclair talks about in his book, Lifespan. We also have metformin, kind of hot in this space. Metformin upregulates one of the same proteins that exercise upregulates, AMPK. And then then the classic, and I'm sure your audience, if they've listened very long, they've heard of rapamycin, the antibiotic that targets the protein in the cell that actually tells the cell to make protein. Well, rapamycin cools that off, and then you wind up with an upregulation of autophagy. Now, this is what we've just learned, is that we've got a paper that we expect to see. It's been accepted. We expect to see publication by the end of the year. If you take mice and you fast them, you get autophagy, okay? It upregulates. If you take a spermidine knockout mouse and you fast it, you don't get anything. So we're about to move spermidine from mimetic to key molecule in the autophagy pathway. It's critical down there. So this is some of the stuff that we're learning as we go on this. So spermidine, it's more than, listen, we know that when you raise spermidine levels, you raise autophagy levels. We know that. That's very clear. But we weren't sure at first, is this a trigger or is this a key mechanism? Well, with this latest paper, it looks like we're going to start referring to it as key mechanism, because we know it's critical in that autophagy pathway. We know people who live in blue zones, who have these 90 to 100, regular living in 90 and 100. They have spermidine-rich diets. Now, they get those diets from raising it in nutrient-rich food, typically gardened on their own. It's not industrial produced. We struggle to find spermidine-rich wheat germ in this country, mainly because industrial growing processes have milked a lot of these micronutrients out of the food. We're all trained when we go to university. We learn nutrition as proteins, fats, carbohydrates. This is the first thing we learn. and then they throw in vitamins and minerals. They take these micronutrients, which is, the list is 50, and they compare them to 3 of the macronutrients. And it's like, okay, the micronutrients look like they may be as important, and not, they are as important, if not more, than the macronutrients. So getting these micronutrients into the diet is critical. And spermidine is just one of those molecules that we now recognize as an essential nutrient. We expect it to get vitamin status at some point.
And it is the little things. There's nothing bigger, right? So it's the little molecules we all overlook and always want to go for something bigger. But, you know, it's very true that we know spermidine can be replenished through diet. It's just our diet, the quality of what we eat kind of sucks.
Exactly.
Now, if someone were more in charge of their diet and having a higher quality resource available, whether that's a farm, like you said, a lot of the blue zones, they're making their own. The soil isn't as depleted. It's not conventionally done. What are those foods that are highest in spermidine?
Well, the thing that we see classically, besides wheat germ, is fermented soy products. So I don't know if you've ever eaten natto. Good on you. God bless you, because I can't choke that down. So that's something that's typically very high. There are some naturally grown mushrooms, things like that, some hard cheeses. Again, I think of the food that if I were traveling through Tuscany and I were stopping at the roadside to eat some local farm food, you're probably going to find high spermidine rich food, because of the nature of it. If you're driving through Kansas and you're getting food that was raised on a 20,000 acre farm and harvested with $1 million machines, probably not going to be there.
Yeah. Again, the unfortunate part of living in the United States. But we all are in the same boat, or we should say most of the world. It's not just the United States. I mean, conventional, food and the food industry has changed rapidly, even in developing countries. Now, one of the trigger words of many people are wheat. Gluten, we associate with it. So tell me about people with gluten sensitivities or celiac disease. Is Spermidine Life something that they can take?
We have many celiac patients who are using Spermidine. Now, let's be clear. There is a very small amount of gluten in our product. We're a wheat germ extract, and it's very, when you look at the Celiac Association, what they tell you is you want to have your gluten consumption below 10 to 50 milligrams per day. In a serving of Spermidine Life, we have 1 milligram. So now my wife has celiacs, okay? And I'm telling you, I've held her hair back way too many times when she's gotten polluted, and she is militant on preventing the introduction of gluten into her diet. So we have to be careful. Now, to be called gluten-free, you have to be below 50 parts per million in the product. Okay. We're about 1,000 parts per million in our dose. But if you just take our capsule, we have a lot of people that break it into a protein shake. You immediately your parts per million go way up, right? Your million goes up and your parts stay the same. And we see a lot of people manage it that way. But if you do have someone who is gluten sensitive, celiac, something like that, listen, you got to be careful. There's just no two ways about it. Again, we've all experienced this. And but we do have we have a great doctor out in Boulder, Dr. Elizabeth Yurth, and she talks about the benefits of the improved endothelial and epithelial cell development that comes with spermidine. And many times she believes heals the gut. And there is a benefit, there's a greater, it's all risk benefit, right? So there's a greater benefit to the lowering of inflammation in the gut and the improvement of those epithelial stem cells than there is risk from exposure to gluten.
Right.
So work with your doctor, go slow, but we have a lot of celiac patients who use our product that we hear from.
That's good to know. Now, you're a student of human performance, of athletic performance. Spermidine obviously has an improvement on energy, on cellular function, on just, I would say, performance overall. But now let's get into what a lot of our audience listen and are about, which is more on the medical side, which is healing almost. Maybe some symptoms or even chronic disease that they're living with. What have you seen? I know you work with practitioners, you work with medical office. What have you seen as far as aiding? We're not going to say treating, of course, here, preventing. Sure. These aren't the words we use for supplement, but in helping patients at least alleviate some of the symptomology, what have you seen?
Well, we've seen 3 or 4 big things, and I'll walk you through them. The first thing that you notice phenotypically when you begin to use Spermidine, about 3 to 5 weeks in, most of our customers tell us they notice a change in their fingernails. Their fingernails start growing like crazy, and we get a lot of reports of improvement of hair. And so when you go back, and if someone wants to learn about Spermidine, the thing I refer them to an article that was in Cell that was called Spermidine in Health and Disease. It's a great review article, and there's 5 benefits that paper talks about. And one of those is the upregulation of epithelial stem cells. Now, your epithelial cells are the cells that make your skin. Okay, they make so not just the skin on the outside, but they also make that lining of the gut. Those are epithelial cells as well. And so when you have the upregulation of those stem cells, again, phenotypically, you really see it show up in fingernails start growing like crazy. That's the big thing that we notice. Okay, everything else on benefits has to be measured with some other marker. Now, we just did a small pilot study here in this country, and we had a group of patients use our 6 milligram product for 30 days. So we just released a 6 milligram product that's available through physicians, and they use this for 30 days. So we measured blood markers that included blood sugars, blood lipids, inflammatory markers, and we did quality of life measures as well. We measured at 0, 15, 30, and then 45 days. So we supplemented to 30, but measured at 45 days. When you look at the blood sugar markers and the blood lipid markers, not only did they improve throughout, but it continued to improve at the 45-day mark. And this was important to us because I think it's, listen, this is working deep in the cell. A lot of supplements you take hit a receptor, fire something on the nervous system, and there's an immediate response. That's not the way this product works. This product has got to have time to work down into the cell to upregulate that autophagy and then go ahead and start that process. But at 30 and 45 days, we saw a dramatic improvement in all the sugar markers. So insulin, sugar, and A1C all improved. And the lipid markers, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, all improved. Our inflammatory markers were mixed. We had some improvement, so we don't think it was a pilot study. It was really small. We didn't have a big enough N in this to get any kind of power, but we wanted to look for some initial, what are we seeing with it? So where do we start to look? Now, we backed that up with a paper that came out, it's now almost been 3 months ago, looking at fatty liver disease and Spermidine supplementation. So one of the things we see when you supplement Spermidine, we saw an improvement in fatty liver in humans. So, and it talks about the paper, and frankly, I'm not a good enough chemist to dig down into this. I need to work on that a little bit more. But they saw an improvement in the enzymatic behavior in the liver, and it was the lack of Spermidine that caused the drop of this enzymatic behavior that caused the increase of fatty liver. As you restore Spermidine, you restore the enzymatic behavior, and you see the resolution of the fatty liver, which falls right in line with our blood sugar studies. I mean, these things go hand in hand. So this was really exciting. So it's not just that classic autophagy pathway and inflammation, but we're starting to see this at an organ level. You talked earlier about, medicine and what we do. Medicine classically trains our doctors at an organ system level. Okay, there's a problem with the heart. There's a problem with the kidney. There's a problem with the liver. Well, what we're finding is that medicine needs to operate at a cellular level. And so when we start looking at, I do a term in my talk is you won't die when you run out of time. You die when you run out of energy, and energy is a mitochondrial issue. And so when we look at mitochondrial behavior, mitophagy, all these things, these are all upregulated and improved with autophagy that is stimulated through spermidine supplementation.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up that idea of energy. I was speaking with my father, who was the medical director here, a doctor at our clinic, and I was telling him I was interviewing you and then Spermidine, and he said, it's really all about the energy in the cell. If you don't have the energy to defend and replicate, disease
Absolutely.
ensues. So he says we put patients on lowered immunity, this and that. It's not that it boosts the immune system per se, the system. It boosts the cell's ability to defend itself because it has the energy now. Think about it. If you don't have the energy,
take care of itself.
Right. If you don't have the energy to go to the gym, to cook food, to do things, you start to wither away a little bit, right? You start to become weaker. You become more susceptible to other things and injury, let's say. So, it really breaks down. And you're right. Medicine and doctors need to look at the building blocks, not the systems. The systems are just organized cells. That's it.
Yeah. And I, you know what? I want to stay on that point for just a second, because again, I come from the exercise community. I've been teaching the exercise sciences since 1987. And I believe the fitness industry failed without a doubt, because when you talk to someone, listen, we're recording this on Tuesday before Thanksgiving. We're getting ready to go into the holiday period. And then January 1st, boom, all the resolutions start. What are the resolutions? I want to lose weight. Worst goal in the world. Okay. We have failed at that so many times. The reason you exercise is to train your mitochondria to improve them, because that improves their ability to produce energy. It improves your ability to live longer. And you don't have to lose weight to do that. It is a nice byproduct, okay, when it happens, but don't use weight as your primary indicator. It's a secondary indicator. And then we can take this one more step in the fact that as we're improving energy and as we're improving these processes, you don't have to be in a CrossFit gym, laying in a puddle of sweat in order to get the benefits of exercise. If you get a heart rate monitor and you learn to train in zone 2 and 3 of a 5-zone system, there are huge lifestyle benefits that come from zone 2 work. And the fact is, you don't know you're in zone 2 unless you're wearing a heart rate monitor. So this is the real opportunity when you're looking at exercise and health improvement. Listen, I call it my 4 rocks in the jar of longevity. The bottom one is movement. As an animal, we evolved to move and adapt. We live in environments that don't let us move and adapt necessarily anymore. So we have to hack that. We have to hack that with exercise. We need nutrient-dense food. We don't necessarily get it all the time, so we have to hack our food with supplements. My third rock is sleep. Okay. If in the absence of sleep, everything, I mean, when Mother Nature wants to take you out, she takes your sleep. Mm-hmm. And so always hacking our environment to sleep. You can't hack sleep, but we can hack the environment, make sure we're getting good sleep. And then light is my third. You see a red light panel here over my shoulder. I think light is a nutrient. And so those are my 4 big rocks, and they go in the jar of purpose. You have to wake up in the morning and have a purpose. You got to have something that you're working towards, because the decisions not to engage in exercise, get good sleep, get light, get nutrient dense food, only is enabled through the desire to live long and healthy. And so this is the process. And it just so happens that spermidine is one of those key molecules that we've come across that, wow, when we get it in the diet, it makes a big difference. But you can't take spermidine and be sedentary. You take spermidine and go walk. Take spermidine, hack your sleep. Get the lights out of your bedroom, get to sleep. Get spermidine, get quality light. These all go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I love that idea, Don, of purpose being a part of that as well, because it is true. I'm a big believer of purpose-driven medicine, meaning if you don't have a why to get better, you're probably not going to get better. You're not going to put in the work yourself. Now, I think conventional medicine, just like I think you said, fitness kind of failed. Conventional medicine failed in that they don't care about a why. Here's a pill, keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to feel a little bit better, but then you're going to feel worse, and we'll give you another pill. We'll keep doing that till you're dead. And so it doesn't ever give you the true why to get better. It just gives you something to cover up the pain created by your not why, and the actions you've taken to get you sick.
I saw a meme the other day. It was one of the best things I've seen on the internet. It says, taking a pill and thinking you're healthy is like getting a loan and thinking you're rich.
Very true.
They're just not the same. That health, again, I call it those 4 rocks in the jar. I think those are critical. The jar is purpose, but you've got to get those 4 big rocks in there. And I'll tell you where this comes from is that Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In that book, they talk about rocks in the jar. And once you get the big rocks in, is it full? No, you can get sand and gravel and water into the jar. But if you put the sand and gravel and water in first, the big rocks don't fit. So you can't get obsessed with the rocks and gravel. You've got to get the big rocks in the jar. And too many times medicine is gravel and sand.
Mm-hmm.
If you'll get the exercise, nutrient-dense food, get sleep, and get quality light at an effective level, you know what? There's not a need for medicine.
Oh, yeah. Those foundational pieces are free. Those foundational pieces like sleep, going outside, getting sunlight, like you said, light, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fresh air, all this moving, walking outside. Again, these are not things you need to particularly go to the CrossFit gym and pay a membership for.
And you can hack them.
All that. Yeah.
You see a sauna over my shoulder. Sauna is a wonderful, and we look at sauna, we look at heat therapy. It's culturally ancient.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I had a chance to participate in a Native American sweat lodge ceremonies for a while. Oh my God. What a wonderful experience. It's incredibly spiritual. It's the hottest sauna you've ever been in your life. It was, I felt like my skin was going to come off at times. But what a wonderful practice. And whether it's in the Scandinavian countries and their use and love of sauna, or we see it moving culturally through many, many cultures, heat and cold are good stimulants, and they can be a hack to exercise. Listen, there's some data that says sauna is as good as cardiovascular exercise.
Yeah.
Okay. The best data says a little cardiovascular exercise and some sauna is even better.
Yeah.
Right. So, listen, that's one of the beauties. It's just about prioritizing and making sure it's part of what you want to do.
So let's talk about some of those hacks. You're obviously about performance optimization. We talk a lot about autophagy through Spermidine. You mentioned lights, red light, mitochondria health, all of that. You mentioned sauna. What else is in your repertoire do you advise people do?
So, well, listen, it goes back to the 4 rocks. Okay. Yep. Literally. And the other big recommendation I have, listen, a heart rate monitor costs about $50 to $70. I believe it is the single most important tool that you can use in exercise. Being able, it gives you a scoreboard. It gives you a place to look. And I'll tell you, there's a little bit of an addiction that goes with this. When you start to exercise with a heart rate monitor, all of a sudden you show up to exercise and you don't have your monitor with you. You're like, oh man, is this even worth it? So I'll warn you now. And you know what? Right outside the door of my office right now, my wife is riding our Peloton. And she's got her Apple Watch and it's talking to, so there's a lot of good technology right now that's really enhancing our ability to improve that experience. So I think heart rate is critical. I'm also a huge believer in heart rate variability. So I wear an Oura ring. I'll confess, you and I were talking before we start. I live in a 42-foot RV. My wife and I travel nationally, but in my old house, I had a credenza that probably had 50 different heart rate measuring devices in it. Heart rate monitors, HRV, things like that. HRV is a wonderful tool. We know HRV, we used it as a selection tool for my wrestling team at Ohio State. So I knew who would be an All-American the first day of the tournament based on HRV status. I know your HRV will go to 0 the heartbeats before you die. Okay. That we know that will happen. So the way I look at it, the more I push my RV away from 0, the healthier and the better I am. So using a piece of technology, like I said, whether it's an Oura ring or you got to be careful with the wrist straps. I'll tell you, that technology I don't think is settled yet. It's hard to measure HRV. There's a lot of good tech that's coming up right now to measure this. So buyer beware when you're looking at these tools. But I think HRV is an important overall marker. I can't wait until I go, and I work with a great functional medicine doctor. I love this guy. He understands systems, but he still depends on lab tests 2 to 4 times a year. I can't wait. I said to him, when am I going to walk in and you're going to look at my HRV and you're going to look at my CGM data and make decisions? Because I believe CGM data is much more valuable than A1C data.
Yeah.
And they go hand in hand, right? But I think it's more granular. When you're using tools of daily measurement, it gets more granular. You get better feedback because you can associate with CGM data. I can associate exercise with an improvement in my sugar. I can associate good sleep with a change in my HRV. Those things go hand in hand. If I'm only getting data every 2 to 4 times a year, who the hell knows what it's associated with?
Yeah. No, I'm fully on board. We have a great HRV system we use here, multiple actually at the clinic, because it does give us a much more comprehensive assessment. Labs are wonderful, but they're a little bit downstream at times. They're very interpreted differently alone, let's say. If you combine that with HRV, with other spectrometry types of looking at tissue instead of blood, all of these other things, you get a much more robust picture. And HRV, you could do so much with. You could look at hormones. You could look at autonomic response. You could get all these different things, energy pathways. I mean, it really is a very, very comprehensive way to analyze the state of health of anybody.
Yeah.
So I think it's awesome that you're really looking at that as a main function to how you see your own health state.
Ultimately, and then my third big biomarker that I use is watts per heartbeat. So when I exercise using a device that measures wattage. We have a Peloton in our rig. I have a Concept 2 ski ergometer that gives me wattage, feeds out. So ultimately, I want to be able to do more work with less heartbeats. I want this relation, work, heartbeat. So everything that you do should be raising your ability to do work at the same heart rate, or lower your heart rate to give a given amount of work. But when we get them both moving, boy, things are going great. So that watts per heartbeat is a great biomarker. And ultimately that's what you're looking for. You see a drop. Listen, the first thing we learn in exercise science is that one of the benefits of exercise is lowered resting heart rate. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's where resting heart rate comes into play. The amount of work it takes to stay alive at rest is a constant. We call it 1 MET. And that's always the same. But as your heart rate drops to deliver the amount of energy to supply that 1 MET, there's a health benefit. That's why we see resting heart rate is such a great measurement. We know that when resting heart rate bumps a little bit, there's a little bit more of a demand on the system. We can see viral and bacterial infections 2 to 3 days before you're symptomatic. We used HRV as a tool on 2 occasions when I was at Ohio State. You have 10 guys in your starting lineup. You're allowed to travel 16. The NCAA lets you take 16 with you. So we're trying to decide who the other 6 are that are coming with us. And I'm like, our 58-pounder is going to be sick on Sunday, so we need to bring a backup there. And they're like, what are you talking about? And this is on a Thursday. I'm like, his HRV started dropping this morning. He'll get symptomatic. He'll wrestle fine Friday. He'll get symptomatic Saturday. He'll be sick Sunday. And we nailed it twice. So, and I don't know if you guys see that, it's sure. Nice when I've got a group of elite guys, I'm seeing their data every day, but that's the kind of observations that you can make. So, this is that autophagy, exercise, life pathway, immunity. It all goes hand in hand. And we just happen to sit at the entry of a novel molecule, spermidine, in Spermidine Life that turns out to be beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, those patterns of health and disease are there if you find them and you look for them. And you are looking them through HRV. So they are everywhere. We see these patterns of life, and that's the whole point of, being in line with what you see in nature, basically, as well. Absolutely. And applying that to humans, which are part of nature. Now, tell me, outside of Spermidine, what else do you have going on? What's exciting for you that you got coming up?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the real exciting things was my company Okay, so let me build this up. So again, my background, exercise scientist. I've had a background in HRV for a long time, but back in 2015, I helped the coach from Ohio State solve a problem with one of his wrestlers, and we diagnosed it, and we prescribed this guy back to exercise health using HRV strictly. He was way overtrained. He was maladapting to his training. We used HRV to say, okay, what training is appropriate? We take a kid who's struggling to where he made All-American that year, and we basically modified 9 or 10 exercises. So it's like we saw the power of this from a diagnostic standpoint. We then used it prescriptively. Do we train harder? Do we train less? With in wrestling, the real season starts in January. So we have weight cutting season in November. You wrestle a couple tournaments, you go into December weight, and then there's a break from Christmas to New Year's. And the guys come back right before New Year's, and we usually start our next real drive for nationals. Now, I get about 7 days between they get back and when we go to a match. So I can really do a deep dive into training and really push them hard. Well, the guys all come back the first day, and we're going to bury them. Okay. We've got 7 days, and we're going to bury them day one. I got the worst HRV measurements on my team in an entire year the day they came back from holiday. And what we learned is family stress is worse than any stress. Okay. And I see this data, and the guys are warming up, and it was completely unexpected on my part. And I went to the coach. I said, listen, we cannot bury these guys today. We need to go to plan B. We need to do a drilling low level. Let's get back in the groove. We did that, came back the next day. All the numbers were back up, and boom, we hit it hard. But if we bury them that day, we may never get them back. We may never get the recovery back. So we used it prescriptively. Well, and finally we can use it for selection. Listen, we qualified 10 guys for nationals last year there. 8 of them had an RV that I predicted would make them All-American. They did. 2 of them didn't, 2 didn't. So we can use it for selection. It's an incredibly powerful variable. So when we start to look at that, and for individuals, as I watch the HRV community, I see people making decisions on how they're going to train that day based on what their numbers were from the night before. I think that's a mistake. I think what you have to do is you got to get a goal out there. I call them trainable life events. It's something that you put a picture on the wall for. No one takes a picture of their scale and puts it on the wall. Okay. It doesn't happen. So that's why weight loss is such a bad goal. But if my goal is I want to enjoy the family vacation in Thursday and Friday. So we'll have Thanksgiving Thursday, and we've got a big blended family thing we do down here in North Carolina. Friday is Family Olympics. So we have 3 families that are together that will be competing against each other in all these different kinds of games. And the memes that come on phone texting are hilarious, getting ready for this. But this is an event. This is a life event. This is something we look forward to. Whether it's a 5K run or a marathon or a hike or something like that, something where you throw your arm around someone and you take a picture. That's what we train for. Okay. Keep that out there. Use your HRV to make sure you're moving in the right direction. You may have a low day, but you still got to do the training. If all of a sudden your stress is causing you not to adapt, then you have to take a step back and adjust, but you got to base it on the goal. Okay. Not what I did the night before. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Now my company came to me and said, okay, so how would you supplement this? Well, I left sports science to go work in cannabis. I had some people talking to me, and I'm like, okay, I need to figure this out. And what we learn when you go into the cannabis business is chapter 2 of Exercise 101 should be teaching about the endocannabinoid system, part of your nervous system that is run with molecules that look like cannabis molecules. When you exercise, you produce a molecule that's called anandamide. This is where the runner's high comes from. This is the saddest, and it modulates your nervous system. HRV is a measurement of this. Okay. So when you look at, and we've all heard of CBD and these kinds of things coming along. As I've looked at this industry, I said, wow, there's something here. So we actually are releasing a product December 1st. It's called HRV Plus. It's in a brand that we call Mode and Method, modemethod.com. But HRV Plus is a blend of cannabinoids, CBD, CBDA, beta-caryophyllene, which is a dietary cannabinoid, some other supplements. This is all in a fish oil, omega-3 DHA EPA fish oil. But the fish oil also has what's called SPM, specialized pro-resolving mediators. SPMs are the final stage of the resolution of inflammation process. They're biologically available and they really improve inflammation. So our HRV Plus is a combination of cannabinoids and omega-3 fats, DHA, EPA, SPMs in a single supplement. Our samples we went through a sample program with this. The results have been wonderful. We're very excited about it. So that will release December 1st. So that's the other thing on our docket as we move into the new year.
Amazing. Really exciting stuff. Now, on top of that supplement and on top of the O-ring, are there any other systems that you would recommend to actually monitor your height rate variability, HRV monitoring?
Well, okay, I got to be careful how I answer this question. I think you have to be buyer beware. I'm not going to criticize someone's product that's out there, but I absolutely do not recommend most of them. Okay, so so when you measure HRV a lot, what you find is there's a lot of people making wearables that say they have HRV, but the data is not consistent with what I think is necessary. It's not good. It's like getting on a scale and saying, hey, you're somewhere between 5 and 1,000 pounds. It gave you a weight, it weighed you, but Can you trust the number? Well, there's a lot of stuff on the market that says they measure HRV, and frankly, I don't think you can trust them. So listen, I trust Aura, and I have no relationship with Aura. I've just spent a lot of time looking at data and looking at this, and I really like that product. So there are other things too. There's good groups out there. There's a group that's called Elite HRV. They have a technology that you can use on your phone.
Yeah.
These are good scientists. I've paid a lot of attention to what they're doing. There's a guy out in the Seattle area. His name's Joel Jameson, and he has a program called Morpheus. Joel gets it. He gets the data. Morpheus is a pretty solid process. So, when you start to look at this is the place I look. You know what? And you know what? You can get a polar heart rate transmitter. You got to get the chest transmitter because it's EKG, and you can use an Elite HRV app that's free, and you can start to learn to measure HRV with a very small investment. I think a polar H10 transmitter is $50 to $80. The app is free on your phone. So this is a good place to start. But figuring out how to work it into your lifestyle is part of the challenge.
Oh, yeah. No, that's part of the journey. I think just guiding a little bit to start, and then you jump down that rabbit hole and you learn more about it. You experience it yourself. You learn what works, what doesn't for you. And that's part of it. As much as I think it's great to ask these questions of the experts like yourself and gain guidance, you got to experience it for yourself. That's the biggest thing. You can't just listen to one person on Instagram, follow them to a T, and expect success to just come. It's not how it works. There's
so much. This is one of the things I talk about. Evolution only happens with extinction. Okay. So you have to have an extinction event for a set of characteristics to become evolved. We haven't had an extinction event for a long, long time. And so what you get, you get diversity. You don't get evolution. You get diversity. We have a huge amount of diversity in our genetics. This is the reason someone can be vegan and be successful, and someone can be carnivore and be successful. It's not one or the other. It's a giant bell curve. Okay. It's a lot of people in the middle, but you might be on the ends. And this is where N of one medicine comes into play. And HRV and these kinds of things are N of one medicine. When a drug company creates a drug, it's designed to fit the middle of that bell curve. But you know what? There's a third of the population that are not there. There's a sixth that's on one side, the sixth that's on the other, that it just is not effective at hitting. So you got to figure out where you fit in that process. And that's the N of one that you have to have if you want to be, again, when we start looking at longevity, again, a pill does not buy health. The same way a loan does not make you rich. And you've got to figure out, how do we get to that point in a manner that's driving cell renewal and cell performance and mitochondrial performance so that we have the energy to live.
Absolutely. Don, where can people learn more about Spermidine Life and the product?
So if you go to spermidinelife.us, that's our website for Spermidine Life. You can also, and so that's where you find all things Spermidine. I think we'll probably have links in the show notes for a discount that people can use to, if they want to try Spermidine Life, they can use the notes in the show notes to get a little bit of a discount there. If you want to learn about HRV Plus, go to modemethod.com. That's those two places. So spermidinelife.us, SPERMIDINELIFE, spermidinelife.us is the best place to learn about that.
Don, thank you so much for coming on. This has really been enjoyable.
It's my pleasure. I love working. And if people have questions, you can find me on social media. I'm Don Moxley on, I put most of my science stuff out on Twitter. If you contact me through LinkedIn, you usually you'll get a response there. If you follow me on Instagram, you might see where we're traveling as we move through our third of our life.
No, and good luck with that. I mean, we talked a little bit before the show on that, where you'll be going and you're searching for a new home, or let's say the new home is searching for you. The new area is searching for you.
Our new home find us. That's exactly an
amazing way to do it. So best of luck with that. And thank you again, Don. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. And happy Thanksgiving. Have a great New Year's. And here's to really moving into the new year with a set of goals that make a difference and really contribute to the betterment of well people. I mean, this is what's so important about what you're doing, and we're just excited to be part of it.
Absolutely. Health is wealth. And whether you're looking to extend your lifespan, ward off the diseases of aging, or boost your energy, better health does start with healthier cells. And as you heard Don say, Spermidine is just one of the promising ways to promote cellular health. So until next time, continue writing your own healing story.